Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to present one of the women in the struggle in South Africa who stood not behind their men, but for many years in front of them while their husbands were in prison. And I ask you to share our excitement in enjoying the company of Mrs. Winnie Mandela.
At the back entrance to the Pretoria court, large crowds gather to watch the accused being driven away to start their life sentences.
Mandela and 7 fellow prisoners accused with him of sabotage were all condemned to life imprisonment after a trial that lasted 8 months.
The government has crushed a plot to overthrow the South African government by sabotage and revolution with communist assistance. Mrs. Mandela, what are your feelings today after the life sentence passed on your husband?
Well, I am slightly relieved. It could have been far worse than this. In fact, my people and I expected death sentences for all the accused.
It was actually scary to visualize the future. We were all caught up in that war of liberation. Self no longer mattered. The country came first. When they were incarcerated, on hindsight, they actually looked after our leaders, because from then on, the violence we witnessed in the country was untold, and one doesn't know what would have happened to the leadership if they were out there with us. We were the cannon fodder, we were the foot soldiers, and we were vulnerable. We were exposed to the viciousness of apartheid. When they were incarcerated on Robben Island, we were allowed one visit in 6 months. We hardly actually knew each other. We married in June 1958. It's like it happened yesterday. I was just a young girl. I just qualified as a social worker. And he asked me to help them raise funds for the prison trial. We oscillated towards each other, and that was it. We were great lovers. He was banned and confined to Johannesburg, so he had to get permission to travel to my rural home, where we got married. I came from a family of 11. My father was the school principal. He had a tremendous influence on me. He would tell us about our ancestors fighting for their land, because these people had come to grab our country. That is probably what made Winnie to be who she is today.
Winnie threw her entire weight into the struggle. In every conceivable way, Winnie worked for the ANC. Of course, that made her a huge target for the South African Security Police, who hadn't expected that. They were quite surprised initially. And then the head of the security police, General van der Berg, said, "We will destroy this woman." They understood that they had to destroy Winnie if they wanted to destroy the struggle. And of course, as soon as they focused on Winnie, entered the inevitable barrage of informers and spies. She was betrayed time and again by people that she trusted, who inserted themselves into her life. She very often ended up being arrested and shocked that people would do that. These were trained people and were paid to share whatever they got to know.
When I was taken, the house was swarming with the security branch, all white. I remember Zeni clinging on my skirt and with little Zinzi behind, pulling me and saying, "Mommy, Mommy, don't go." You were held in solitary confinement for months and months. It was meant to kill you emotionally and to kill you to such an extent that there were only two options. You either decided to fight to the last drop of your blood, or you succumbed to the enemy and decided to work with them.
I love that picture. Zeni and I with Mommy wearing her ANC toque. It wasn't like an ANC toque, but it had the colors. She used to love wearing that. It's the black and green, you know, like part of our flag. Black for the people, green for the land. That was the gate at our home, Vilakazi Street. With my mother, you're not supposed to say don't, because then she will do. If you're going to say, we're going to ensure that we lock this man up, that people forget him, they forget even what he looks like, they forget what he sounds like, they forget that he even exists, that makes her commit to ensuring the opposite. She's an activist, she's a fighter. She's not the type of person who can be voiceless.
By the mid-70s, most of the African countries up north, Central Africa, were liberated, and down south, there were still countries that were still under colonial rule. But that was changing. And when the student took to the streets, protesting against Africans being used as the medium of instruction, the whole country was engulfed into this wave of violence.
We don't even regard them as Soweto riots as such, but a national disaster. It is the beginning of what we have always warned the nationalist, racist government about.
The system blamed Winnie for inciting those uprisings, and she was taken away to a rural province 100 kilometers away from Johannesburg.
When they came to take my mom, we thought it was the usual raid. They'd taken her to Protea police station. She is being interrogated and completely unaware that she's being packed up and sent to Brantford.
Well, I had gone so used to being arrested that I had two little suitcases where I packed the bare necessities, toothbrush, toothpaste. I was so used to that I honestly did not anticipate the punishment.
is your lifestyle like here in Brantford?
I am really here in prison. It's really being in prison at your own expense, being in exile in this kind of area. Brantford is really a living grave.
That's in Brantford. Our second or third day there. We didn't know where we were. We'd never even heard of the place. I think it was deliberately done, like to take her, like from the relative comfort of what she was more familiar with, like as the house in Soweto, to this harsh new reality where she knew absolutely nobody and understood the language but didn't speak it. So it was designed to completely crush her and make her feel isolated from everybody, to make her feel trapped. Even as we were driven to the house and we saw people like walking past, people were even afraid to look at us, to smile at us. There was just this huge sense of fear.
The whites told the people who are working, you must be very, very careful about a communist woman who has been placed in your community. Don't talk to her. And even the school children, they were told by their masters, don't talk to a certain woman called Winnie Mandela who has been placed in your community. She is a communist. This area is it's area for the whites, you see now, the Boers here. You know, if you ask for the whites only, even on the station, we could not even sit on the benches, whites only. Yours is just right down there.
The first thing I did, of course, was to recruit soldiers into Mkhonto Isizwe. I arranged their transport from there to cross the borders into Lesotho. Thousands from the Orange Free State. The most important thing was communication. I was getting my directives from the senior leadership, OR, and Chris Hani. Our strategy at the time was you hit targets at the same time in the whole country so that they cannot measure the power of the other side.
The ANC's strategy of attacks on important economic targets, like this Sasol oil refinery, was also stepped up, this year by a third on last year, and by 4 times on 2 years ago.
Would you be prepared to take up a gun and kill someone in order to achieve what you would regard as your freedom?
Now I know I can.
You would?
Now I know I can. In the past I didn't. But when I saw my children mowed down in Soweto in 1976, then I realized that in order to defend that, I would do exactly the same.
Up there, there's that mountain whereby the special branch would stand over there using their telescopes to see everything that is happening in Winnie's house.
As thinking people and as people are determined to survive and as fighters, we just always managed to beat the system. We had a coded way of speaking. We would express ourselves in such a manner that the enemy wouldn't be able to detect what we're talking about.
I know, and the people of this country know, that Mandela will lead this country to freedom.
It's very hard now to imagine someone in a small place like Brandfort, isolated in this dry, dusty township, but who came out with such strength and such charisma, and was the only person who would stand up in front of the media and the international media and speak without inhibition.
It is the usual cosmetic South African racist government story.
Act illegally, promote the aims of the ANC, quote her husband.
If your husband is released, would he be prepared to go into exile, into Zambia or elsewhere?
Not at all.
There she would stand up and do it without any sign of fear, any concern for the law, complete contempt for power and authority. And it was an amazing show of strength and courage and fortitude.
We are prepared to respond likewise to the government that has declared war.
I was political reporter of the Rand Daily Mail, and I was assigned to cover Kennedy's trip. So I went down to Brandfort, and it was completely remarkable.
Thank you so much for letting me come by.
But visitors managed to find her whether she was banned or in internal exile, as the world began to respect her as a dominant political force in South Africa.
In the same way that people are supposed to forget about my father in prison, they were supposed to forget about her in Brandfort, and her spirit was supposed to be broken and so on, and literally written, she was supposed to be written out of history. It was a bold statement from the Kennedys to acknowledge her role, to recognize that if they wanted to discuss the future of South Africa, that she's a key player. She's the constant, she was always there. She was there before Tata and then went to prison. She was there when our people were exiled. Some people come in and out of history, but Mami is a constant.
Mr. Mandela's release, is there any possibility that could happen anytime soon?
The moment he declares that he would not be involved in the planning of violence, he can be set free. It is the ANC which is jailing him at present.
My father says, I am a member of the African National Congress. My father says, I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated.
She was banned at the time, but she was there at the stadium, dressed as a domestic worker, and she was there in the audience, and nobody had a clue who she was.
The declaration of a state of emergency was an admission of defeat. The government had been battling the struggle and had got nowhere with it. Not through political means, not through terrorizing the population, not through infiltrating the ANC. And it was a declaration of war, which meant that the ANC had no choice but to do the same.
The explosions caused extensive damage. Inside, they ripped out the walls and floors. Outside, windows were shattered in nearby buildings.
21 people died during the riot last week. The fighting with police started after about 500 people had gathered to protest against eviction from their homes.
State President P.W. Botha declared a state of emergency in South Africa. The township riots, he said, must stop.
This state of affairs can no longer be tolerated.
So for the army and police, a whole new arsenal of tough security laws.
The police, in their heavily armoured Casper vehicles, went back into the townships this morning. The death toll has been rising almost every hour.
Emergency legislation that allows them to arrest anyone without a warrant, imprison them without access to a lawyer, impose curfews, and seal off townships at will.
Was now virtual warfare.
Local people say police were responsible for most of the
killings. Well, I've just seen 15 young people with gunshot wounds all over their bodies. When the police saw groups of young people moving around the townships, they simply shot them. Unprovoked, just shot them.
It's just a tip of the iceberg. It's really an ominous sign of the times ahead. It is the beginning of what we have always feared.
When she came back from Brantford in the mid-80s, which is when I met her for the first time, we were on the precipice of either descending into complete total anarchy or trying to rescue the situation. The 1985 state of emergency and the 1986 one, which followed shortly thereafter, saw more than 10 to 15,000, mainly children really, being detained. What the regime wanted to do was effectively to intimidate the whole country into submission and basically clean out the activist layer that was there, but also send the message that they're not going to tolerate any dissent.
Apartheid is a criminal act. The white man has the audacity. He is 3.5 million. We are 30 million. But our regime can go to hell. We want to be people.
She was the only person who could wake up and wear ANC colors, go to a meeting and shout, "Long live ANC," and then go home. If any one of us had dared to do something like that, then you'd know that's the day you must also leave the country. And that was a very important position, to have somebody in the country who can defiantly be a member of the ANC, openly be a member of the ANC. And quite frankly, the system didn't know what to do with her, because it was just a state of defiance. The resistance movement had actually penetrated to levels where even if you took another 10,000, there was just going to be another layer.
Those who tell us the moral thing to do is to embargo the South African economy and write off South Africa should tell us exactly what they believe will rise in its place. Strategically, this is one of the most vital regions of the world. Around the Cape of Good Hope passes the oil of the Persian Gulf. Southern Africa and South Africa are repository of many of the vital minerals for which the West has no other secure source of supply. But the South African government is under no obligation to negotiate the future of the country with any organization that proclaims a goal of creating a communist state and uses terrorist tactics and violence to achieve it.
The head of the ANC called a news conference at the Palace of Westminster. Angry the government won't see him unless he renounces violence, he insists the violence comes equally from President Botha.
It's a bit heartless to keep saying the ANC must abandon its violence, because that is saying that the regime is not violent, even at a time when daily on the television screens we are seeing the regime shooting down children.
She was considered one of the most senior commanders of Mkhonto weSizwe. She and Chris Hani worked closely together, and that relationship grew over the period of the 80s. So she was basically the highest authority inside the country.
Apartheid was so vicious, they were killing our people. It was safer for all the operatives underground to come into the country, hit a target, and go back to Lusaka, because at the time the enemy was shooting to kill. I used to receive the ammunition from outside. It would be buried, and Lusaka would then send a map of exactly where the weapons were, and I had to see to it that we went to dig up at dead of night the stuff that had been buried there.
I was with the security branch and arrested many terrorists from Mkontobi Seswe, the armed wing of the ANC, and had them sentenced to 18 years imprisonment, and some of them hanged. All my black agents had to infiltrate the ANC, trade unions, and of course South African Communist Party. And I also had a surveillance team with cameras, tape recorders, and so forth. When it comes to Winnie Mandela, she's always been on the radar. We were aware of her activities, listened into her telephone conversations, and were following her around, and had people all around her. She was closely monitored by the security branch. We were still in a position to persist in keeping the country under control, but then other things came into play.
Recently, Mandela was moved from Pollsmoor Prison in Cape Town to a hospital for treatment of TB.
The world got a fleeting glimpse of the man it hadn't seen for years. The hospital visit fueled speculation about his release.
The Mandela demonstrators assembled in their thousands in a North London park before setting off on a march through the capital.
South Africa needs Nelson Mandela. The world needs Nelson Mandela.
Towards the end of 1988, Nelson Mandela was moved to hospital. And Winnie goes down to Cape Town to meet him, and as fate would have it, is on the same flight as the Minister of Justice, Gobi Coetzee, who was a hardliner.
Mommy approached Gobi Coetzee at an airport. She was leaving to see my father, and she confronted him openly and said, "I want to know from you, when are you going to release my husband?" I went to sit next to him, and Gobi Coetzee said, "What will it take to shut you up so that we can release your husband? Who should we talk to?" I said, "Who are you talking to now?" After the initial shock and that type of like in-your-face confrontation, they began to have a conversation. And that conversation eventually led to an exchange between this apartheid Minister of Justice, where there was no justice, and my father as a prisoner. It started with this woman whose role is so often overlooked and disregarded.
Is he going to come up? No, we don't know. I am visiting him again tomorrow.
She planted the seed, and the rest is history.
And it's then that the discussions started taking place between Nelson Mandela through Dr. Neil Barnard from National Intelligence Service, and the ball started rolling towards a political solution.
The answer to why was Nelson Mandela the God-given individual with whom we could start, that was 27 years in prison made him a worldwide icon.
In July 1988, over 200 million people tuned in to a pop extravaganza held as a tribute to Nelson Mandela on his 70th birthday.
The ANC leaders in exile didn't focus their attention on Mandela for a long time, but now positioning themselves internationally for change. They understood that Mandela, thanks to all Winnie's ceaseless efforts for more than 2 decades, was perhaps their ticket.
We had the pinnacle of power under our control, and quite clearly he was more than interested in starting talks to try to, also from his side, to find out, can we find some kind of understanding.
It was quite clear that at a certain point the ANC was going to take over the government of the country. So therefore it was important to work on him on his own without the leadership in Portsmouth prison.
I think it's a wonderful idea of Kobie Coetzee. Let us prepare the man in normal circumstances in a house where he can, at least for some time, lead a normal life. Although it is on the area being controlled by correctional services or the prison, it's a normal house.
Victor Verster was very strange. This false sense of reality that they were trying to give him.
Yes, we bugged the house in which he lived. It's no secret. And we were discussing with Mandela and I myself many times, sir, we have a problem with Winnie. She's your wife.
My father was actually quite excited because he had been told that he was offered that his family can now move in with him. And then my mother had to come with this blow to say, you will not. We will not become glorified prisoners. I will not allow you to do that and compromise yourself.
How the visit was and whether it's clarified things for you?
Yes, of course, it has clarified things.
And are you...
A great deal. She was very much in his life as that wake-up factor, you know, wake-up factor, and always the person who had the ground intelligence.
He would have loved to go with us today, and he would love to be released any day. And he wants to come home like all the leaders. His release is not in his hands. Matiba wasn't aware of it at first. Isolating him from the rest of the prisoners was, in fact, to work on him in such a manner that he would come out of prison actually preaching as much peace as possible to protect them more than anything else.
The townships were war zones. There were tanks and armed personnel carriers in Soweto. The youth were up in arms. There was enormous anger from the side of the youth towards the elders, whom they saw as not fighting hard enough. And Winnie understood more than anybody else in the ANC that the younger generation were the hope for the future.
Mandela FC has been demonized. At the time, there was a war between comrades and carjackers who were used by the system. You know, that whole black-on-black violence, they were using them against each other, so there's a lot of brutality and fighting there.
For the friends and relatives of Victoria and Kengi.
Secondly, Victoria Mxenge had been assassinated in Durban.
The civil rights lawyer was gunned down in her own driveway after a day spent preparing the defense of two fellow United Democratic Front members facing high treason charges.
So, at the same time that Mami is thinking we need to remove these children off the streets, these children are thinking we need to protect our leader because leaders were vulnerable and were killed.
met Winnie when I was harassed by the security branch forces. I stayed in her house for the hiding place. She taught me about the politics of the ANC, what is the ANC and what is all about in the ANC. And she taught me about the army things, about the armed struggle, what is the armed struggle, and what is the guerrilla army is. Because that time the slogan was, disarm the enemy and arm the people. I joined Mandela Football Club there. At that time I thought that it was just a football club. But when times go on, I saw that, oh, these guys are cutters of Mkhonto season. There were about 8 guys cutting the house and the family of Winnie. There were tracksuits that we wear of Mandela FC. But when times goes on, we saw that people now are crying about Mandela Football Club. We found that people who are using our tracksuits to rape and kill, sometimes they kill people and say, yeah, he's Winnie's boys. They thought it's us. So we stopped using our uniforms.
And you couldn't communicate with them at all. They said they were waiting for a project because the boys were wearing illegal t-shirts or some kind of rubbish like that.
We were not allowed by Mama to interrogate someone, but us, in our corners, we were doing it to get the information who's working for the security branch, for the enemy side.
It was 1989. I was still with the intelligence section, and President P.W. Botha said we must come up with a psychological warfare strategy against the enemy. Everything was coordinated between the Defence Force, National Intelligence, and Foreign Affairs. It was called Covert Strategic Communication, STRATCOM.
We are being agitated against worldwide and threatened in the name of freedom and liberation. Pressure is being exerted on us as the arch oppressors of our time. Many of the methods involved are suspect because of either the slyness or the dishonesty involved.
I had different projects approved by him. The one was Operation Romulus. Now, Romulus was counter-revolutionary. So Winnie Mandela fell amongst those people. I already had about 40 journalists working directly or indirectly for me. So through them, I could have specific reports placed in newspapers, and it would be front page.
4 members of the football club were arrested in a raid on Winnie Mandela's house on Sunday. Police gathered all their possessions in a detailed search for evidence.
Stompie Moketsi was kidnapped by the so-called football squad. Stompie, suspected of being a police informer, was later murdered.
The charges will add to growing controversy about the football club bodyguards. Throughout the 8-hour operation, Winnie Mandela had cooperated fully with the police, though she insisted that the boys had nothing to do with the murder of 14-year-old Stompie Moketsi on Sunday.
The kind of reporting we have seen, the deliberate and mischievous lies that keep being perpetrated by the media, is beyond anything we have seen.
A political funeral with a difference. Just this once, the South African government allowed full news coverage normally banned under the emergency and kept police out of sight. All because the murder of 14-year-old Stompie Moketsi is blamed not on the state, but on the bodyguards of Winnie Mandela.
Police imposed no restrictions at this funeral, raising accusations they're trying to exploit Stompie's killing and deepen divisions among blacks.
Plainclothes police with cameras watched from a distance, but authorities made no move to interfere.
His murder has outraged many South Africans, sparking divisions within the anti-apartheid movement. Many black activists are refusing to back Mrs. Mandela and have severed all ties with her.
The mass democratic movement, at this point, hereby wishes to distance itself from Mrs. Mandela and her actions.
Throughout the town, graffiti were scrawled on billboards, charging Winnie Mandela with involvement in Stompie's murder.
There's no rift whatsoever between the African National Congress and this family, and never will be. Perhaps the idea is to so destabilize the political situation in black communities that the government simply sits back and look at us fighting amongst each other, discrediting each other, dividing each other, and it would suit the government to release Comrade Mandela in that political atmosphere.
Many people to this day believe that we try to divide and rule. The whole notion is not historically correct. She had all the capacity to be a Jackie Kennedy. And you know, even from the intelligence service side, we discussed and hoped and dreamed even that she must play a responsible role. Side of Nelson Mandela, he will become president, she will be first lady, the mother of the nation, so to speak, and we will all be working together in this new country. Sadly, that was not to be.
I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February, at about 3 p.m.
Perhaps this is the moment to thank the organizations, individuals, groups, governments, and all those who have campaigned for this day.
Clear sign of movement. This is the hour the world has been waiting for. There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa. Mrs. Winnie Mandela next to him, waving to the crowds. Hand in hand, they leave the Victor Verster prison. Officials, marshals of the National Reception Committee trying to get the people, and a salute from Mr. Nelson Mandela, his wife Winnie, greeting the people outside the fences of the Victor Verster prison. That is the man who the world has been waiting to see. People running alongside the car.
In many ways, when he was in prison, Mandela was looking at the world through Winnie's eyes because she brought back information to him. He in turn trusted her with information he really didn't trust anybody else with. And so that moment of him seeing this new world into which he's released through Winnie's eyes is so poignant.
Prior to his release, I would say about 10 days before his release, I had one of my last discussions with him. And I told him, sir, may I give you some advice? The first speech after your release, the world will be looking. Please don't make one of those long struggle, slogan, ideological speeches. Do not fall back to apartheid and whatever happened wrong, and you will carry on with the struggle and so forth and so on. Be brief, say, here we are, we're carrying on to make peace, thank you for everybody, you will understand that I'm tired now and things like that. And just, you will have your time for speeches. That was not to be
in Africa.
The point when he's on the balcony and making his first speech as a free man, but reading what he had written with Winnie's glasses because he had misplaced his own, is so symbolic of Winnie's role in Mandela's life for so long.
The factors which necessitated the armed struggle still exist today. We have no
I was with my family,
but to continue.
Watching it. At that moment, I already started calling some of our sources, asking them what the hell is going on, because I was sitting there and what is going on, what we've been working on can develop into a catastrophe.
What of course was really sad is that Mandela did not specifically talk about Winnie's role in the time that he was in prison. For many people it was an oversight. He should have given Winnie the recognition that she deserved, at least alluded to the fact that he would not have been there had it not been for her and her ceaseless work and organizing and her suffering and everything that she sacrificed in order to get him there.
I was horrified when I realized that I had lost my identity. And suddenly I was nobody, Mandela's wife.
I'm absolutely excited to be out. We are loyal and disciplined members of the organization. It is my intention to go to Lusaka at the earliest possible convenience. They will tell me what role I should play.
When people on the ground know who their leaders are, there's nothing that you can do successfully to alter that relationship, because that is genuine and that is real, and that is historically strong. I think they were too formidable. I think together as a couple, they were just too powerful as a couple. You've got these people who are so influential within their communities and beyond. They have impacted, and they are together, and they have this ability to see things from two different perspectives, but wanting the same thing for the same objective. I just think it was too much power to have as a couple, and I think there were various people who felt threatened by this, and for anybody who had an agenda, they had to get rid of this. They had to get rid of this solid foundation first, and then proceed.
Nelson Mandela got a rousing welcome from the city of New York today as he began a 10-day tour across the United States. The former longtime political prisoner will address Congress and the United Nations, and he'll be received at the White House.
I made a documentary film through the South African Broadcasting Corporation because I had all the friends there. And we put all the material together, and that I flogged into America, and it was shown on 40 different channels. And that led to her being declared an international terrorist. And when she wanted to visit America with him, the Americans said, no, you can't come because you're still on our list. So they had to delete her name, especially for her to come.
It is true. I am much angrier than him. It is true, I have personally found it very, very difficult to believe in the sincerity of the ruling class, the Afrikaner. I do battle with myself about believing their sincerity. As far as I'm concerned, we will watch that negotiation table. If anything goes wrong there, I will be the first to go back to the bush, take up arms, and fight the South African government.
Mandela had gone to an emergency meeting of the African National Congress to discuss black factional violence when the government filed charges against his wife. At the courthouse, a strong show of support for the Mandelas. The government has claimed the charges against Winnie Mandela are not politically motivated. The case involves 14-year-old Stompie Sipe.
Today, Winnie Mandela was formally charged with kidnapping and assault in the death of a teenager allegedly murdered by her bodyguards.
The government arrested Mrs. Mandela's bodyguard, convicted him of murder, and last month sentenced him to death. It's taken authorities nearly 2 years to charge her, and many in the black community suspect that the government may be using the case to harm the Mandelas and the African National Congress.
That was the intention of apartheid, to break things down, to break down family units, to fragmentize anything that was black unity. That was the purpose. So in many ways, they succeeded in creating some kind of division. So then they tried to pitch my parents like the saint and the sinner. And you're thinking, like, what even gives you the right?
It was a period of ambivalence, return of the exiles, which is what she was tasked to do by the ANC. And this was now the beginning of the negotiations and the doubts as to whether this was the real thing or not.
The ANC was making critical choices about compromises it was prepared to make and the path it was setting the country on. And what was dominant in the ANC was a kind of centrist, middle-of-the-road preparedness to concede a great deal and to make the deals both with Afrikaner nationalism and with global capitalism.
I personally feel that we over-negotiated in Odessa because we found that capitalism is a very difficult system because the owners of production, the owners of resources are those who are in power.
There was a very important constituency led by the likes of Chris Hani, in which Winnie was a critical figure who were arguing against too much compromise, against that middle-of-the-road path and looking for a socialist transformation. The ANC leadership were looking to manage her, contain her, as part of the attempt to contain those left-wing forces.
The incident with Stompie Sipe and Jerry Richardson is symptomatic of what happened with Winnie throughout her life. With all the informers that had been planted, who changed their testimony by 180 degrees in court, what exactly was the truth? They had testified that she hadn't been there, then they changed their minds and said she had been there. How could anybody really come to a reliable verdict with all that murkiness around that case?
For anti-apartheid groups in South Africa, scenes like these are a cause for despair. In areas of the Natal province, black-on-black violence has reached proportions of near civil war, as political factions wage running battles for control of the local black township.
It was a critical period in the interim between 1990 and 94, where the balance of power was being played out. The apartheid government, in its negotiations, was trying to elevate the status of the Inkatha Freedom Party as an alternative, as a counter to the ANC.
the biggest obstacle of all now to the liberation of South Africa and to the sorting out of things in South Africa is caused by this black-on-black violence. Because even if the whites were prepared to negotiate tomorrow, I mean, we blacks are still busy butchering each other, you see.
There was a high and dangerous level of black-on-black violence that threatened to destabilize the whole transition process. It was not really black-on-black violence, but government instigated or supported or encouraged attempts to weaken and undermine the ANC as its chief negotiating partner.
I actually said to Madiba at one point, we know these people. We fought against them, not only politically, not on platforms. We fought them physically. We know each other. We know each other so well that we cannot trust the apartheid state forming any government of unity with you, Dad.
It is quite clear that the government has either lost control over the police or the police are doing what the government wants them to do.
I take very strong exception to the alleged statement attributed to Mr. Mandela, to the effect that I am seeking to promote my cause over the corpses of his supporters.
Nelson Mandela is under siege, his search for a peaceful end to apartheid in jeopardy. And now his wife's prosecution threatening to further damage the Mandela name.
I have never believed that she was guilty of assaulting anyone.
It was not some facade. I think he believed deep down in his whole being, as we all did, that this was part of a wider conspiracy aimed at her, but also aimed at him.
Nelson Mandela, born by the dignity of his moral crusade, but tainted now by the woman he loves and cannot bring himself to criticize.
But as ever, unbowed, she'll now appeal. And as ever, with the full support of her husband.
Strategic communications is the planned coordinated presentation of a message by means of various communication instruments to change attitudes, values, and to reach the national objectives. When it comes to Winnie Mandela, we were more concentrating on her personal life, which was in tatters and so easily to see and to hear and to expose. So many people would read it, and it's not going to cost us a cent. That was the purpose, my purpose.
I was given that letter by Nelson, who was given it by the editor of the Sunday Times, to go to Winnie and ask her whether it was genuine or not. She looked at it, burst into tears, and said she was betrayed.
Obviously, it was some witch hunt which was meant to isolate her. There was, even then, a clear campaign to delegitimize, as it were, the so-called radical wing of the ANC.
Mandela was given the ultimatum to divorce Winnie, to in fact get rid of Winnie or be president. That was the ANC leadership who decided on that.
In view of the tensions that have arisen owing to differences between ourselves in a number of issues in recent months, we have mutually agreed that a separation would be best for each one of us.
You know, Mommy wouldn't make it seem like she suffered that much. But that's the thing. Mommy's just always had that capacity, you know, to die inside, you know, and like just be beaming and glowing externally. She's just always been that person. I was at home when Chris was killed.
Chris Hani was shot 4 times in the driveway of his own home in a quiet Johannesburg suburb, Dawn Park.
I do not know how one puts the degrees of hurt and a feeling of total helplessness, a feeling of despair. It was so clear that it was a very complicated assassination. You couldn't attribute it to the enemy completely.
85,000 South Africans pay homage to a revolutionary. ANC leader Chris Hani received a statesman's funeral.
When he was killed, one of the hopes of the country was gone. Here was a man who had led the military wing of the African National Congress. We literally worshipped Chris Hani. We dreamed of a South Africa where he would be president one day.
Those who have deliberately created this climate that legitimates political assassinations are as much responsible for the death of Chris Hani as the man who pulled the trigger. We want an election date now.
After Chris Hani was assassinated, the country was in flames. Winnie's appeal came up barely 3 months later. There would have been enormous violence if Winnie had been sent to prison. I don't think any court would at that point have thought it prudent to deny her appeal.
One candidate who could be a problem for the ANC, particularly in attracting moderate voters, is Winnie Mandela. Her overwhelming popularity in the townships has put her number 5 on the ANC list, and she'll almost certainly become a cabinet minister.
I never went away. I've always been with my people. That is why they have spoken. My political aspirations have never changed. I'm where I belong, the Parliament of the people. I've been put there by the masses of this country. I have never stood for a position and said, I'm available, elect me as a president of the Women's League. No, I've never done that.
She had already made it quite clear that she didn't see eye to eye with Mandela and the ANC about much of the policies, that she leaned towards a more socialistic state, that she wouldn't have bent over backwards to accommodate the former rulers and oppressors, etc. So they needed to isolate her, to eliminate her from the inner circle of the ANC.
It is the realization of hopes and dreams that we have cherished over decades.
It was just all a question of the ANC understanding Winnie's power, understanding how easily she could mobilize ground-root support. There's no question in my mind that had she been embraced by the ANC, had they made her part of the inner circle, she would have been deputy president and she would have been president after Mandela.
That's then I felt triumphant. After such a bitter struggle, after losing so much blood, after losing almost everything we had, our children, our uncles, our aunts, that moment is undescribable.
When he became president and Winnie was not even seated with the VIP guests, it was just heartbreaking that Mandela would not allow her to even be seen as a very important person on that occasion. And one understands that his ego had been injured by Winnie. However, he was always so fair to everybody. One would expect of somebody of that stature to be able to overcome that. If he could forgive other people for such terrible transgressions against him and against the country and his family, he could have done that for Winnie.
I had achieved everything I fought for. What more did I want? I didn't care for this. It was just like water on a duck's back. It still is to this day. As long as he would be president of the country and lead the people to liberation, that's all that mattered to me.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
I realized that there was this huge program that I became a project to certain people. I became a project to prepare Madiba for this presidency. There had to be all kinds of hangers-on around him who continued this program of discrediting me. Madiba was safer without me because I would always see through the political intricacies of their plans.
During 1994, I received a phone call from the Commissioner of the South African Police Service that I must come to his office because the Minister of Safety and Security wanted to see me. He told us that he was a member of the Executive Committee of the ANC during those times, and that we must restart the investigation into all the cases against Winnie Mandela. And we must start from Stompie Sepe right through and try to get evidence that Winnie can be charged for murder. I think there was some political motivation behind him because the minister is the political head of the police, and I thought that the ANC, through City Mofamari, were behind the request to reinvestigate Winnie Mandela. So we started this whole investigation. We went to Jerry Richardson in prison. He was serving a life sentence for the killing of Stompie Sepe. And there he told me that Stompie found out he was a registered informer of the security branch in Soweto. So he killed Stompie Sepe to cover his own tracks. And Winnie Mandela must never find out that he was a registered informer. The minister gave us carte blanche, money-wise, logistic-wise, and we can travel through the world where we need to go. And there was a South African citizen closely involved with Winnie Mandela in the custody of a British MP. He lived in her house and so on.
Watching this, what was in your heart?
Tiza Kebekulu has since become famous. He was the central character in a book and a BBC documentary. He was rescued by British Baroness Emma Nicholson, who has since taken him under her wing.
She should go down for life. They're not going to forget. That evidence is going to be theirs.
But you will find that the book also contains very significant material on the events that surround his testimony.
I mean, it was a very clear portrayal of demonizing somebody who spent the rest of her life trying to liberate South Africa. And it was very clear that its orientation was to delegitimize her, make her look like a criminal and a hater.
I have watched in painful silence my character being butchered in the media. I have witnessed my contribution to this democracy being vilified and ridiculed. South Africa, I ask, is it public interest that my name is littered all over the streets of this country? That the media vandalize my dignity without just cause?
Order, please. We are here not in order to put anyone in the dock. Our objective is to find out the truth in order to assist in the process of healing our land, to promote reconciliation, and to ensure that the awful things we hear about will not happen again.
From the word go, the charges started piling up. The first day's witnesses implicated Madikizela Mandela in 4 serious assaults and 6 murders.
To me, the TRC was a trial. It was not established to find out anything other than the fact that I was being retried, being humiliated to show that I was not fit to be his wife.
The first day of the hearing was a huge surprise because I hadn't anticipated such a wide international interest in her story. The allegations that were coming out were serious. They were of a criminal kind, and yet there was no criminal investigation in relation to those issues. They were there in a platform that enjoyed international attention. And there was no way her image was not going to be marred by that process.
Katiza Kebekulu says he saw Madikizela Mandela stab Stompie with a shiny object one night.
It was something that was shining.
After the hand was raised for the first time, did you see what happened?
She was stabbing. She stabbed twice.
It was obvious that one was also dealing with witnesses whose credibility was questionable, but whose motives were clear. They wanted money, and in exchange, they were going to say anything and everything against Winnie.
I did not have any police friends. I did know a lot of police, but I was not friends with them.
On Tuesday, the so-called coach of the football club and the man who was convicted of killing Stompie Sepe, Jerry Richardson, will testify. He has said that he killed Stompie Sepe on the orders of Winnie.
I slaughtered him. I slaughtered him like a goat.
But Jerry Richardson's credibility as a witness was undermined this week when he confessed to being a police informer.
Richardson was in prison by that time. He may have been promised that they will help him somehow.
They knew I didn't kill Stompie. I was being tried just as a farce. I was the only one in the African National Congress who was taken to the TRC by her own government. The only one.
I thought they were criminalizing her so that they can politically neutralize her.
Is there an opinion by a section of our country about the nomination of yourself to the Deputy Presidency of the African National Congress in December?
Yes, that is true. As a matter of fact, as far as I was concerned, the subpoena could have been served last year, could have been served many, many months ago, and the unhealthy coincidence in my mind that this must happen a few days before the national conference, to me, suggests it is part and parcel of that agenda. The whole perception of reconciliation was gotten completely wrong because it has been misinterpreted and in terms of what it was supposed to achieve. Then Winnie Mandela becomes demonized because she remains the voice of the downtrodden and the conscience of the people. That voice that says we were not treated right and we're still not being treated right. That's the reality.
I speak to you as someone who loves you very deeply, who loves your family very, very deeply. I would have said to you, let us have a public meeting. And at that public meeting, for you to stand up and say, there are things that went wrong. There are things that went wrong, and I don't know why they went wrong. And say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my part in what went wrong.
I was seething with rage. To this day, I ask God to forgive me for not forgiving him. He was acting there for the public, acting there for Stratcom, begging me to say I was sorry.
I beg you. I beg you.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say sorry as if I had been responsible for apartheid. I mean, how dare, really?
You are a great person. And you don't know how your greatness would be enhanced if you were to say sorry. Things went wrong. Forgive me. I beg you.
The one person who kept the fires burning when everybody was petrified, and I didn't blame them because of those dark forces of apartheid were killing our people like flies. I didn't blame them. When sometimes I would shoot that fist alone, and they were too petrified. You put me on trial before the TRC, and A. Desmond Tutu sits there judging me.
For the first 20 years, it was accepted that compromises were made, that deals were made, and that they had to be made, and that worked for the better of everyone because it gave us what's loosely called a peaceful transition. But now you are very clearly seeing young people saying, but hold on, the reason we still have so much inequality, the reason we are so frustrated in our attempts to study and advance and change our lives and change our children's lives is because of those compromises you made in the 1990s.
I think the way it is going to end in South Africa is that people like Winnie Mandela will be vindicated. There will come a time where history will remember that some of the skepticism that they had about the so-called miracle of the solution that was found in the 90s was justified. I think already people are beginning to wonder whether we were not sold a dummy, as it were, that the deal was one-sided and that the racist regime got away with murder, literally.
To this day, when I sit in Parliament, every time I press that blue button, I'm constricted with pain. Did it take so much loss of life, so much blood, in order for me to vote? It cost us so much, and it continues to cost us so much. We dreamt of a South Africa that was totally free of racialism. A South Africa where everyone would be fed equally, where youth would be employed, where the scarce resources would have been available for the dreams we instilled in them. The Freedom Charter says the wealth of the country belongs to all who live in it. That is the South Africa I would have loved to live one day.
Mandela, nangu etilongweni, nangu sesulu, nangu etilongweni, inima Afrika, nizote, inima Afrika, nizote. Nangu sobukwe, nangu etilongweni, nangu Mandela, nangu etilongweni, inima Afrika, nizote, inima Afrika, nizote.